Look, I'm sorry. I have no idea how you leave off all of Abdul Carter, Nicholas Singleton, and Chop Robinson from your All-America teams.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, that is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every single day. I am Zach Sako. I'm your host of the show. And thanks for joining me on this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Become an everyday or subscribe wherever you get your podcast or on the YouTube channel. Comment what you think about the AP disrespecting Abdul Carter, Chop Robinson, Nicholas Singleton. They did get two Penn State players right. We're going to talk about that in this episode. Plus, I joined Big Ten Ted to talk about Drew Allar, Nicholas Singleton, and his dynamic duo counterpart, Katron Allen, and some more of the Penn State offense for this upcoming season in the final two segments of this show. But yes, Abdul Carter, Chop Robinson, Nicholas Singleton, nowhere to be found on the AP All-America first and second teams. That's right. Both of them that just completely left off the list. I don't know that people watch college football anymore. I really don't, because, okay, I get the argument for the first team. These guys are young players. Aside from Chop Robinson, he's a veteran, but Carter's in his second year. Singleton's in his second year. There's some veterans that you like. Of course, Blake Corum makes the first team, but then you look around and you say, how do you leave Carter and Singleton and Robinson all off of at least the second team when the stats are pretty comparable, if not better? So let's begin with Abdul Carter, because this one grinds my gears the most. Okay, number 11 left off the list. And here are the six linebackers that the AP thinks are better than Mr. Carter. Harold Perkins of LSU, Tommy Eichenberg of Ohio State, Jamon Dumas Johnson of Georgia. That's the first team for you. Then Jeremiah Trotter Jr. of Clemson, Barrett Carter of Clemson. Clemson's got a pretty good linebacker duo there. And Cedric Gray of North Carolina. I got some thoughts on Cedric Gray here too. This is going to become a Locked On ACC rant in a second here. All kidding aside, about Abdul Carter though, all these guys have pretty identical stats here. Okay, Harold Perkins, well-deserving, very talented. He's in his second year with LSU. 72 tackles, 7.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 1 interception, and 4 passes defended. Then you look at Abdul Carter. 56 tackles, 6.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 4 passes defended. He does not have that 1 interception. So yes, he's lagging here in total tackles compared to Perkins, but all those other stats are pretty identical here. How about Tommy Eichenberg? 77 tackles, 2.5 sacks, no forced fumbles, 3 passes defended, does have 1 interception that was returned for a touchdown. Okay, so he's a tackling machine, but I'm pretty safe to say that Abdul Carter has a more comprehensive game. He's doing just about everything. He's not just your middle linebacker. He does it all at the second level. He'll rush your passer, he'll step into passing lanes, and he'll stop the run. Eichenberg, pretty one-dimensional here. And then now Cedric Gray. Cedric Gray for North Carolina. I'm only going to go a little bit out of my way to defend him here. I have no idea how he's the first team, how he's not on the first team. He's a second team All-American. 144 tackles in 2022. Everybody else has about 60 to 70. 144. 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 interceptions, and he's on the second team. Who watches college football anymore at the AP? I'm not really sure. I just don't think they do at this point in time. But Abdul Carter those are the first team All-Americans that I'm comparing stats to for Abdul Carter. And they have someone who's significantly better from 2022, and he's left off the first team. He's bumped down to the second team. Does it make any sense? Doesn't make any sense to me. Abdul Carter should at least be on the second team with what he's probably one of the most slept on players at this point in time in all of college football. I have no idea. How he, of all players, is flying under the radar, because you look at the Penn State, people who cover Penn State, you look at people who cover Big Ten football, and he's getting enough respect to say, okay, we'll let it slide here. But from the national media, it just continues. And it continues to Nicholas Singleton at the running back spot here, left off of both teams. Here is who the AP thinks is better than Nick Singleton. Blake Corum, understandable. He was a Heisman contender a season ago, and he had the injury. Raheem Sanders of Arkansas. Now, he's on the second team. I jumped the gun a little bit here. Quinshon Judkins of Ole Miss is also a part of the first team. Then you have Raheem Sanders of Arkansas and Braylon Allen of Wisconsin. All of these guys are good, but we're going to get into some math here that's going to help my case here. Let's start with Mr. Singleton. 156 carries. Okay, that's a lighter workload in comparison to these other guys. 1,061 yards, 12 rushing touchdowns, 1,061 rushing yards, and an average per carry of 6.8. Every time he ran the football, he averaged about 6.8 yards per carry. Corum was hurt, on pace to be a Heisman contender. I totally understand him being, and I don't like saying this about Michigan, but I did actually go to my high school, if you can believe that. So I have some bias, not a lot of bias. It's a strange relationship with what I think of Blake Corum here. But credit where credit is due. Then Quinshon Judkins out of Ole Miss, 274 carries, 1,567 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns with an average of 5.7 per carry. I want you to keep that in mind, the 274 carries. Okay, just keep that number in your mind. And then Raheem Sanders at Arkansas, in Arkansas's run-only offense, may I mind you, 222 carries, 1,443 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, and 6.5 yards per carry. And then Braylon Allen, who I think should be bumped for Nicholas Singleton. If you're going to have to bump anybody off this group, 230 carries, 1,242 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns, average of 5.4 yards per carry. Okay, so that's the lowest of them. But let's do some math here. Okay. If Singleton had the workload of Quinshon Judkins for the Ole Miss Rebels here at 6.8 yards per carry times 274 rush attempts, if he had that workload, Singleton would have had 1,863 yards. You also got to factor in that he probably would have had more rushing touchdowns as well. So you look at the numbers. So Singleton was able to do more with less. Okay, 6.8 yards per carry. Also shattered there were for a long time. We're talking multiple years here, folks, where Penn State didn't have a 100-yard rusher. Easily broke that in the second game of the season. Now, granted, it was against a MAC opponent in Ohio, but still, Nicholas Singleton easily took care of that and got to 100 yards. But you look at all of this, Singleton has a fraction of the workload, was able to eclipse 1,000 total yards, had 12 rushing touchdowns. That is second in that group. And then the average of 6.8 yards per carry out of Judkins, Sanders, and Allen. And you mean to tell me he's left off the second team? Argument there for him to whether or not he should be on the first team. Okay, right? But the second team, he's better. He's better than Braylon Allen. He's better. I think he's better than Raheem Sanders. Imagine if Singleton was in a run-only offense. It's hard to say that he's not, but I really would bump Braylon Allen here and put Singleton on the second team. And now let's get to Chop Robinson. I don't mean for him to be last in the group here, but Chop Robinson, nowhere to be found as well. 5.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 2 passes defended, 1 fumble forced, 1 fumble recovered. Pretty solid stat line. First team, not arguing for him here. These guys are pretty much the best edge rushers in the country. I will say that. I will admit that. Jared Verse out of Florida State and Braylon Trice out of Washington, 10 sacks, 9 sacks, respectively. Almost double of what Chop Robinson had. Now, Chop Robinson didn't play as many snaps last season, but the production was there. And then you have JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State. I said that one right. Yeah, that's right. JTT out of Ohio State. 3.5 sacks. 10.5 tackles for loss, 4 passes defended, 2 interceptions. And then Dallas Turner out of Alabama, 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 1 fumble recovery for a touchdown. Chop Robinson has better stats than both of them. Why is he left off of the second team? I would personally bump Dallas Turner. I mean, honestly, I'd bump the Buckeye. But I think about too often that Tuimoloau terrorized Penn State in that game most recently last season. So I'm not going to necessarily bump him off here. Again, credit where credit is due, even with the direct enemy. But I really don't see it. Robinson, again, similar to Singleton, doing more with less. And somehow he is left off of not only the first team, understandable here at the edge rusher spot, but the second team. It's just disrespectful. All three of them, Carter, Singleton, and Robinson, left off the second, at least the second AP All-America teams. Argument for more so the argument is there for Singleton to be on the first team of the three of them. Now, they did get a couple of players right. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. And here they were right with two players for Penn State. Olu Fashanu coming in as a first-team selection, and Kalen King also being a first-team selection for the Nittany Lions and the AP. Now, Fashanu is the best tackle in college football, so I'm glad the AP agrees with that. Would have been a top 10, potentially a top 5 NFL draft pick had he declared last season. He comes back, and his injury cut short the season for him, but he's going to be back at full strength. And Joe Alt, who's is alongside him out of Notre Dame, is also going to be a top 10 pick. Again, credit where credit is due. And then King is the best cornerback right now in college football. He could be a top 10 pick, guaranteed a top 15 pick in next year's NFL draft, alongside Kool-Aid McKinstry of Alabama. Now, King was third in the country, mind you, with Joey Porter Jr. alongside of him, and he had 18 pass breakups and 21 passes in total defended. 3 of those were interceptions, so 21. So both third in the country in those categories. And Kool-Aid McKinstry, a little lower, but still had a good resume. 16 passes defended in total and only 1 interception with Alabama last season. So yeah, it's there. Kalen King is the best cornerback in the country, and Olu Fashanu is the best offensive tackle in the country. So I'm glad that the AP agrees and puts them on the first All-America teams. But they got it wrong with Singleton, Carter, and Robinson. It is Locked On Nittany Lions. Now, in the next upcoming segments here, we're going to talk about the potential of Drew Allar. What can he actually do, as I join Big Ten Ted on his show to talk about over the next 2 segments Drew Allar and then the offensive counterparts around him. Before we get to that, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is Betterhelp. This episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. Whether you're dealing with decisions around your career, relationships, anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life, so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to fit your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedoncollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedoncollege. And if you haven't already, check out the 2-part Ultimate College Football Preview. It is live on Locked On Big Ten. It's live here on Locked On Nittany Lions, available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every single day. And Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Happy Valley Insider. Check them out, happyvalleyinsider.com, Penn State rivals, for all the latest in Penn State football coverage. Now let's flip it over to my conversation with Big Ten Ted.
And now we bring in Zach Sako from Locked On Nittany Lions. All the focus right now, Zach, is on Drew Allar, Drew Allar, Drew Allar. I've said on this channel before, I believe he is the most talented quarterback to ever step foot into State College. Do you share that thought as well?
Yeah, when you look at the modern recruiting era, I think that's the case. Christian Hackenberg is, of course, up there. Okay, when you bring them in as pure 5-star recruits, okay, Christian Hackenberg and Drew Allar were not the consensus number 1, but they were up there. Some people had them number 1, number 2, number 3. They seem to be consensus top 3. Anthony Morelli, I guess, was in that conversation. So as far as the most talent, I think Christian Hackenberg was well on his way to being more talented. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to watch guys like Kerry Collins play. So I know there's a lot of people that are vintage Penn State fans and would say, well, it's Kerry Collins. It's Kerry Collins, something along the lines of that nature. He did win national titles for them, right? So Drew Allar has to match that standard. Until there's another national championship brought to Penn State, it's going to be it's going to be someone like Kerry Collins who takes that. But in this modern day of recruiting, when you have on 24/7 rivals, the rest of them, and people are constantly, you didn't have that constant breaking down of high school tape and building up these players to play as soon as possible as freshmen. Those days of sitting and waiting your turn are almost non-existent anymore, and you fall short of expectations. So Drew is ahead and progressing very nicely, but unless he can't win, if he wins the Heisman and the national championship, then yeah, he goes down as the best. But in terms of pure talent, it's hard to argue that he's not, just because of all the tangibles that he has right now.
Boy, you mentioned Kerry Collins. You could go back to Todd Blackledge as well, and what they've been able to do. Yeah, recruiting rankings definitely weren't as prevalent back then, definitely as they are now with all the services that you mentioned. So you've been at fall camp. You've been able to get your eyes on Drew Allar, and with the expectations that we talked about at the top of this segment, do you feel from what you've seen thus far in fall camp that he can reach those expectations? Maybe he can even exceed those expectations in 2023. How is he gelling with everybody in camp so far?
I'll preface this. We're not as spoiled as we'd like to be in the media industry here when it comes to State College, Penn State. So we get to see some select position drills for about 10, 15 minutes as far as actual team plays, formations, and everything else. But you get a little bit of a tease. You get a little bit of an understanding of what Penn State is trying to do. And I know that we're going to talk about this, but as far as answering if Drew Allar is gelling, and that's the whole point of this, is getting in that rhythm. They're going to build an offense that is tailored around him, but they're going to use some of the other strengths that they have with Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, and asking Mike Yursich that specifically as far as what they're going to do with the likes of those guys, because last year, not really much of a factor in the receiving game, but now you can get them a little more involved. We saw the T formation a year ago, short yardage situations. People are under the understanding that if you really read between the lines of what Mike Yursich wants to do, go back to Oklahoma State when he was the offensive coordinator with two names that most college football fans should be familiar with, Justice Hill and Chuba Hubbard. Those guys are in the NFL. Now they don't have these lavish careers, but they were good at Oklahoma State. And you look at the film, they were on the field in these split shotgun 2-back sets. So there's going to be some new wrinkles to the offense for Penn State. Drew Allar looks comfortable. He was in those games a season ago for this exact reason, to get comfortable and to be comfortable. So that's the scenario where he's going to look totally lost in the first 4 games is not going to be the reality of it.
Boy, we got to talk about that power tee later on. I love that power tee, what we saw in the Rose Bowl last season. But that was a good segue from what you were talking about. I got some video that you sent me from fall camp, and this stuff really intrigued me. There's 3 clips. 2 kind of go together, and then 1 is kind of on its own a little bit. Let's kind of break it down a little bit. Right here, you look at both Allen and Singleton in the backfield. Singleton kind of gets it on a pitch out here. We get the exact opposite. Fake to Singleton, throw it out to Katron Allen. And this one right here, the next one really intrigued me, where you split Nick Singleton out wide. This is a back shoulder throw, and obviously it ends up pretty good in practice. But I want to kind of break down those 2 things. First, that formation when you see Katron Allen and Nick Singleton right next to Drew Allar. That's as good as it gets in the country, those 3 guys back there in the backfield. How often do you think we're going to see those 3 guys, Allen and Singleton, both next to Allar, as compared to maybe just one of them in the backfield at a time?
I mean, that very well be your base formation. Now, you don't want to completely exhaust your options. And that's why Trey Potts becomes even the more valuable, because a season ago, you had Singleton and Allen being on the field separately. But in this case, now, other than the T formation, but now you're going to have them on the field together. And that misdirection, that option read is simply, you can do so many different things with that. Just imagine this. This is something that I brought up on my podcast too, Locked on Nittany Lions. Imagine a fake to Katron Allen going a counter to the left. The entire defense has to respect that. These guys are almost equivalent. Sure, Singleton's faster, but you talk to Katron Allen, I'm pretty sure he'd say, well, I'm the best running back in the Penn State locker room. And then Nicholas Singleton would say, well, no, I am. That's how good they are. They're good at different things. And that's a good thing for Penn State. So imagine a counterplay out of that shotgun going to Katron Allen. Your defense has to respect that. Your front 7 is going to bite. And then a swing pass out. Now Nicholas Singleton with a full head of steam, a lot of momentum, completely open field. How do you game plan for that? And then you can fake the handoff, fake the pitch out to Nicholas Singleton, and then you have a quick slant to maybe Keandre Lambert-Smith, Dante Cephas, or any of those guys, or a tight end up the seam. Mike Yurcich, watch the film from him in Oklahoma State when he had Hubbard and Hill in the backfield. And something about it too, they went fast. So don't think, oh, well, Drew Allar's a pocket quarterback. Penn State would never speed up the tempo. They're going to go fast because defense is the wear and tear. It's going to Singleton, Allen, Singleton, Allen, Singleton, Allen. Boom, that play action fake over the top. And defenses won't be able to adjust with those athletes in the backfield, potentially getting the football in any given play.
So you talk about the tempo of the offense. Yeah. Could we see in these, you talk about read plays in the backfield, RPOs, of course, all the rage in today's game as well. Could we see Drew Allar, and maybe a lot of people, like you said, kind of view him as a pocket passer? Could we see him as just another added weapon to the run game a little bit in some read plays, or is it mostly going to be focused on those two guys in the backfield?
Well, they pulled Sean Clifford back a little bit. Sean Clifford wasn't always a running quarterback, and I wouldn't describe him as a dual threat, but he was running a lot early on in his career. Now, those, granted, were different offensive coordinators, but it's the same thing with Allar. Do you really want to put him in harm's way? Do you want your 5-star quarterback really trying to take it on a 1st and 10? I can see this on 3rd and 5, a design quarterback draw up the middle, right? You're not expecting that. Allar can move. He's not a statue. Watch the film. Watch the games where he came in a season ago, and you'll see the pass rush. It looks like they're going to take him down. He doesn't stand still. I really like Drew Allar's pocket presence. And in the blue-white game, he did tuck it a few times and ran for about 7 to 10 yards on separate occasions. So just because he's 6'5", 240 pounds, which is great ideal size, he can beat you in a foot race. And I think we'll have a few, and he'll quarterback sneak it out of the T formation. I think a few times. So Drew Allar should have a few rushing touchdowns himself, on top of being a secret weapon when you do need those 5 crucial yards on a 3rd down, or really to convert in the red zone. And let's hear from another one of our sponsors of today's episode, and that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long, because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win. That's right. Every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. How about that? You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Let's get back into it with Big Ten Ted. We're talking about the running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, and if wide receivers should be a concern, how Penn State is going to navigate the passing attack this season.
Okay, let's talk about that last clip that you sent me. Though that was pretty exciting, right? Seeing both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton with Drew Allar in the backfield. That's one thing. But then we split out Nick Singleton to the outside, and when I saw this, I'm like, oh, can of worms open. That's exactly what I thought. And the next thing I thought of was Reggie Bush in the mid-2000s, right? Yeah. When they used to split him out a little bit. It wasn't that they're going to line up Reggie Bush and throw it to him on a go route 40 yards down the field. It was all about getting him the football in space. Yeah. Are we going to see, how much maybe do you think we're going to see Nick Singleton, boy, this is blowing my mind as I'm saying this, Nick Singleton on the outside lined up amongst other wide receivers, and maybe with Katron and Drew Allar in the backfield?
Yeah, you can do, that's another part of the deception in this offense. You can motion out Singleton. You can motion out Allen too. I thought Allen's always been the better pass catcher, because he comes from IMG Academy. Okay. I had the privilege of watching some Nicholas Singleton games up close in person at the high school level, and he came from a predominantly a run-first only offense. They didn't have to pass the football because you had Nicholas Singleton at the high school level, who ended up becoming the National Gatorade Player of the Year. But now, I asked Mike Yurcich that, how far has Singleton, both of them, how far have you come as a pass catcher? And they agreed that he's made leaps and bounds. So, yeah, you could have both of them on the field. It's the deception of, okay, you ultimately tip your hand and say that this is going to be a passing play. Maybe Allar could sneak it up the middle on a 3rd and 5. But if you leak Singleton out to a wide receiver position, whether it's the slot, it's the boundary, same with Allen, You got to put a linebacker on him. You're not going to put a cornerback or a safety on him. Now you got to take one of your worst pass defenders on defense against Singleton, who's an all world-class athlete, and same with Allen. Allen has the better hands. Maybe Singleton's gained some ground on that, but it was noticeable a season ago that Allen was just the better pass catcher. I think Singleton might be the better route runner just because of where they are in terms of overall athleticism. It's no secret that Singleton's faster. And I'm glad that somebody finally brought up the Reggie Bush comparison, because I see Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen as the modern day Reggie Bush and Lendell White. And the only thing, now someone did bring this up to me. They said, well, he can't be Reggie Bush because he hasn't been used in the passing game as much. Well, here we go. Year 2. I think our analysis here is going to live just up to that.
We might see it. You mentioned that about Katron Allen being the better pass catcher. It just kind of blows your mind. Now, both of these guys could end up be in situations, because the first time when I saw that, I could see Nick Singleton on one side and Lambert Smith and maybe Dante Cephas on the other side as well. Let's talk about some of those other wide receiver targets right now, because that seems to be the popular mindset. Is you got Keandre Lambert Smith coming back as your number 1 with Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington out of state college. Dante Cephas, a lot of people have a lot of smoke behind him as maybe the number 2. Who are some other guys? Because that's a big point. Wide receiver depth for the Nittany Lions. If maybe we want to see Drew Allar get to his full potential, who are some of those other guys that could help Drew out in the depth in this wide receiver room?
Keandre Lambert Smith has come a long way, really. From he was always someone that Penn State fans were waiting to break out. When's he going to break out? When's he going to take that next step? And he did down the stretch of the season. Michigan State final home game of the year, final regular season game, and then in the Rose Bowl as that deep threat target. Now, the projection, we don't have an official depth chart yet at this point, but we anticipate that KLS will move inside to the slot. And that's just how versatile he is, because now you bring in Dante Cephas, another veteran, all MAC conference, to play your X wide receiver. If you're looking for somebody else, I know that from the Big Ten point of view, Trey Wallace is a name that people need to know about. In spring practice before Dante Cephas, because he could even be mentioned, because it'd be a recruiting violation since he committed, but he wasn't officially transferred in. James Franklin was not quick to praise a lot of the wide receivers. And at first that was concerning, but then he said, Keandre Lambert Smith stands out and Trey Wallace stands out. You asked some of the players. I asked specifically Trey Wallace after one of those spring practices, and he said Amari Evans. So there's a lot of depth and there's a lot of competition for that second and third string spots at wide receiver. But if you're looking for your first 3, it's going to be Cephas, Lambert Smith, and Trey Wallace.
Gotcha. I just want to bring up a name that was recruited to come to Penn State a couple of years back, I think. 4-star, top 100 kid, Caden Saunders. Where does he kind of stand in the depth? Because he kind of had a little bit of hype to him when he kind of came into Penn State. Where does he kind of stand in all of this right now?
Well, looking at that next open practice that they had to the media, and then they're going to have an open practice to everybody in Beaver Stadium, which I think is very neat. And if you pay very close attention with the way that the drills are run, you can kind of get an idea of where people are. Like, the starters go first, okay? You're not having the true freshmen take the reps first with Drew Allar and Bo Pribula in this quarterback competition, right? And you look at the slot receiver, from what we've seen, it looks like he's third on the depth chart. It's going to be Keandre Lambert Smith. Another Clifford, Liam Clifford, Sean Clifford's little brother, being the second guy, and Caden Saunders. So if you're asking specifically about number 7, he looks like he's battling it out for that number 2 spot. It sounds like Clifford would have more of the inside track to be that next man up in the slot position. But never say never in fall camp that Saunders could. He had a really good blue and white game, and it looked like he had a lot of chemistry and symmetry with Drew Allar as a part of the starting first group when he was in there. So Saunders did have a rough first year. That seems to be the case from what we now know. But he's certainly looked good in public flashes, blue and white game, and then in practice but he hasn't been brought up, but neither is Clifford, and neither have been some of the other guys.
Let's talk about this run game a little bit. We know how good it is. We know how good the offensive line is going to be. How important is the run game to the success of the pass game of Drew Allar? I think kind of when I look at it, I look at this dynamite run game. Just how much is Allar going to throw the football? Just how prevalent is this pass game going to be? How do you think the balance is going to play out in 2023?
It's going to be run heavy at first because Drew Allar still has to get used to starting action. I'm glad that it's great that he saw Indiana's second and third string defense late in the game when it's completely out of reach. These are now meaningful snaps. These are now meaningful plays. And when you have Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen in this offensive line who are basically all back from a year ago, why throw Drew Allar into the fire? Why put so much pressure on him when now you have what works so well for Michigan? Okay, what works so well for Ohio State, where you can close out games. That was something that Penn State missed desperately in 2021. This has always been the formula too. Saquon Barkley's a different story, but then when you look back to after Sanders and Barkley, because they were the feature backs, and you see they were very early picks in the NFL draft, but then Journey Brown and Noah Cain. That was supposed to be the formula, and then the injuries happened in 2020. Journey Brown has, of course, the off the field, the health condition that doesn't allow him to play football anymore, and now he's a race car driver, for crying out loud. But it's always supposed to have been that dynamic duo. They lost that in 2020 because of the injuries. In 2021, they couldn't duplicate it with Cain and a Kevon Lee, who kind of progressively emerged, but was never that true featured back. And now they have that. That's what they want. So why get away from what works and put all this pressure on? All right, Drew, you got to run the football up and down the field, and we got to have an air raid offense like a vintage Mississippi State, for example, or Texas Tech.
Yep. Boy, I tell you what, Zach, you for a young quarterback, lots of expectations. He's got the two things. He's got the run game, and he's got the all-everything tackle. So you got to think things are going to work out pretty well in terms of that. Zach, I want to thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
A lot of expectations for Penn State this season. Thanks again for joining me today.
Appreciate it. Absolutely. And thanks again for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Become an everydayer, subscribe to the YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. An exciting one coming up. Adam Brenneman, former Penn State tight end, rising media star, recently launching State Media, is going to be joining the show. An upcoming podcast here coming up this week. We're going to talk to Adam Brenneman about everything Penn State, NIL especially, the media craze that's going on here that Brenneman is spearheading, and then what he thinks about this Penn State football team, his relationship with James Franklin. It'll all be right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.